Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter and today I'm going to be talking about Kevin Can F Himself Season 1 Episode 2. It's called New Tricks. So spoilers for the episode as always, and this is a Patreon sponsor review, so thank you very much to Alison for making the pick. So yeah, I was very curious to see how this was going to develop once we got past the initial premise, right? The initial premise of the sitcom when the husband's around and then her miserable life filmed in more depressing color tones and more cinematic shots when she's on her own, right? And Alison very much is the main character of this, and this episode kind of gives us a sense of where we maybe are going. And where are we going? Well, possibly murdering Kevin. It seems to be the plan. The episode starts with her having a dream sequence where she's basically just enjoying life after he's dead. But when she's effectively bragging to a waitress in her dream that she killed her husband, she doesn't really know how she killed him. And then the episode kind of starts to be about her looking for the method of how she might kill him. And I did like how she came out of the dream, which is that her dream starts having earthquakes, and then it turns out Kevin's jumping on the bed, which leads us into the sitcom plot of the episode, which is that he is excited for a hoodie arriving that was worn by his favourite football coach. And he is over the moon about this. He's jumping around, he's falling down, it's all very nonsensical. And the sitcom plot develops because Alison actually chooses to take the hoodie herself. Like, she basically steals it, and he doesn't know it's arrived, or he assumes that a neighbour stole it. So it ends up being about this rivalry he thinks he has with his English neighbour across the street, who he assumes stole his hoodie, and a war kind of escalates where he set fire to their garden, and they've set fire to Kevin's bins, and right, and most of this you only hear bits and pieces of course, right? Because we're following Alison. Kevin's doing all these antics, and it's all about him, but we're following her as she's going about her side of the story. And this moment of defiance, of stealing the hoodie, breaking out the glass case and wearing it all day and rubbing her food stains on it, is kind of this like power play or self-therapeutic act of vengeance. It's a good start to the episode. It shows that she's being more proactive, something she feels perhaps more inclined to do after what she learned last episode about the money and the bank not being there and so on. But this episode does a couple of interesting things, I thought, with how it develops the character. And the main one being that it doesn't necessarily just treat her like she is a victim and she's in the right the entire time. I think what's interesting about this one is that it kind of opened up this possibility here that, yes, while Kevin is a complete and utter tit, and he has all these expectations and it is kind of making her life miserable, this episode's kind of turning the camera around on her and saying, well, you do share some responsibility for this, right? You did put yourself in this life, and more importantly, whenever that spotlight is shining on you to take some responsibility for some of the poor choices that you've made, she doesn't want to face that. She wants to run away, and she gets combative about it. This is very late in the episode this happens, but she goes to see Sam kind of after a moment of, well, a big moment of weakness, shall we say. She ends up with Sam and she wants to talk to him about her life choices. And he just straight up says the line, you don't want to talk about these things. You want to have someone to listen and nod and agree with everything you're saying. And I'm sorry, but that's not really, how I'm seeing it here. Because she basically says everyone drifted away, including him, and he's like, well, no, you're the one who drifted away long before I got married to someone else, but you're not remembering it like that. And she gets defensive, she doesn't want to see a therapist. That also comes up during the episode. And I think that's kind of what this episode is getting at. And it's also this idea of, like, everything she does in this episode to get a small victory over Kevin basically is null and void by the end. Like, she wants to kind of hurt Kevin a little bit by taking the hoodie and disrespecting it and wearing it like a cheap thing throughout the episode, but by the end of the episode, Kevin basically just moves on. Like, yeah, he cares about it for a day, 2 days tops, right? Where he's having this war with the neighbors and he's doing all this other stuff. But then he just has a scheme to get insurance money, and he's going to buy an even better hoodie that this guy wore, and that's it. He's moved on, and it doesn't matter anymore. It's probably my favorite cut to her and her own sad reality is probably that moment near the end of the episode when he walks out into the kitchen saying, "Oh, new hoodie day coming soon," or whatever, and he walks out the room, and she's just left standing there in her living room, and there's nothing there except the table that has been duct taped back together, the table from episode 1, because everything else has been removed for an insurance scam that Kevin's cooked up. The details there aren't very important, all things considered, but it does create this great visual of her on her own. And the only thing he didn't think was worth removing is because he's trying to pretend the neighbors stole everything, is the table that she cared about. Now, admittedly, it's not worth anything now anyway. He already sorted that last episode. But symbolically, it's quite interesting that that's the one thing that's left there. It's just her and her table and nothing else. So, yeah, I think this idea of like her messing up and her kind of, the other scene that kind of brought this to my attention, right? So obviously the big one towards the end was the scene with Sam where she basically storms out when she doesn't get kind of the one-sided conversation she was hoping for. The other one is when she goes to the library early on in the episode. She's just put on the hoodie. She's once again eating some donuts that she's picked up. And she goes to the library to do some computer research. And I don't know if that's because she doesn't have a computer at home or just because she doesn't want to do it at home because she's going to try and research how to kill someone. Which, honestly, even going to the library seems like a bad idea here, especially since typically you need to be a member and they'd probably be able to track who'd search for things. But not that we see or look for a membership in this scene, admittedly, the librarian, but still. She basically explains to the librarian that she's writing a romance novel about this woman who's been in an unhappy marriage for 10 years. She feels that she's wasted her life, but then she gets a plan. And the librarian's like, oh, she has an affair with a neighbor or something? And she's like, no. She's going to kill her husband. And the librarian just straight up says, well, why didn't she just leave him? And Allison's like, oh, as if it's that easy. Like, she gets a bus ticket and just moves to a different state. He'll find her. Like, she comes up with these excuses, which is interesting, because if this was like a mob movie and it was this like over controlling like mob husband or something like that, what she's saying would make some sense. I'm not convinced that this lazy piece of shit Kevin would move like to the other side of town to look for her, never mind travel to a different state. He just seems a bit too lazy for that, so I'm not so sure her logic's quite adding up there. But once again, the reason why I'm bringing this scene up is it's an example of her when she's actually questioned with like almost like a plot hole in her logic of, and again, this is not her pretending to be herself. She's sort of doing this under the guise of it being a novel she's writing. This librarian immediately just says, well, why doesn't she just leave? Why does it have to escalate to murder? And I think that gets you thinking about it. Why is it escalating to murder? Why isn't she just leaving him? Well, because she's angry at him, right? Like, that's the obvious thing, is that she actually wants revenge. It's why she took the hoodie. But why does she want so much revenge on Kevin? Now, part of it is because he is kind of the worst, but part of it also might be that she's actually mad at herself because she put herself in this position and she thinks this will make herself feel better. Because saying that he is the devil that is responsible for everything that's wrong in her life means that she doesn't have to blame herself. And I feel like that's kind of the self-analysis part of this entire premise that's really starting to come to light in episode 2, where I think it would work if he was just a monster and it was all about getting back at him, but that would be more of just a dark comedy outside of the sitcom. I think this actually fleshes it out a bit more and makes her more like a real person who has flaws. And, well, yes, she is expected to be all these things in his sitcom world. It doesn't change the fact that she did make a lot of choices that led her on that path, where she did make a lot of choices that led her to not do the things she wanted to do, such as pulling away from Sam, whatever the backstory is there. Now, I don't know exactly how that happened, but I'm sure we'll get that fleshed out at some point, and that seems to be maybe the start of her regrets, was that decision, and now he's seemingly happily married to someone else. We've not actually seen him with his wife, or know if it's going okay, but certainly that's the impression that like she's assuming right now, right? Not even the impression that's been given to us, the audience. We've had nothing really for or against to say if he's happily married. but I think Allison at least is assuming he is at this point in time. So it's yeah, it's interesting. So it's interesting to see, like, why did she end up settling for Kevin? She must have saw something in him, or was it again a convenient thing? Was it a convenient thing at the time because the alternative would be taking a chance on something more daring, like moving away, or like trying to be something that was risky and not a guaranteed thing, whatever that may be. So, I mean, I think if nothing else, this show is about regrets, right? It's about the midlife regret crisis, if you will. Not that I think she's even 40 yet in the show, but just in the sense that she's made these big life choices in her 20s. It's 10 years later, and now she's reaping what she sowed and trying to wrestle with terms of that. And then the other scene that kind of taps into this quite early on, is when Kevin and like the friend are like trying to concoct more schemes, and they want to like do stuff to this neighbor. They ask Patty to get involved and go get fireworks from her salon where she works, and because she hides them there because the friend Neil is like a pyromaniac. Apparently, that's like a running joke in the sitcom part of this episode, and Allison goes out to talk to her, and she's like, wait, are you actually going to go and help these idiots with these fireworks? And she's like, well, yeah, I mean, why not? And Allison's like, well, I thought we were, and Patty just kind of jumps in and says, I didn't really think of us as a we, and kind of drawing this line saying, oh, we're kind of two separate people here, we're not necessarily friends. And Allison asks, well, why did you tell me all that truth last episode about the money in the bank and stuff? And she basically says, oh, I felt sorry for you because you were having these big dreams and delusions of grandeur, of like making your life better. And I knew it wasn't going to happen, and it felt kind of sad. So I put a stop to it, which obviously is a really damning thing to say. It's a really cynical thing to say. And it's one of these things where this is a time where I think Allison gets mad at something someone said to her, and I think she's like totally in the right. And when I say that, I'm not including the sitcom stuff with Kevin. That's a whole different like layer of stuff. Let's forget about all that. But out in the real world, when someone says something to her that she doesn't like, she reacts, upset or whatever. This is one where it feels like, no, Patty is crossing a line. And I think what stuck out to me here is that I think Patty is also a flawed character, right? I think that's the point of this scene, and kind of also what we build that to in the ending, is that she is also flawed. She's also made decisions, and she's kind of accepted them in a different way than Allison has, but it's kind of almost exploring this idea of these two women should effectively be possibly allies, if not friends, but they're not. And they're kind of alienating to each other in a lot of ways. And maybe that's part of the problem, because that's the other thing that comes up with the conversation with Sam later in the episode, is that Allison doesn't really have any friends right now. She did back in the day, back, I assume, during school, maybe college if she was going there, but seemingly not as an adult. And this seems to be something that's kind of been persistent in her adult life. So she tries to reach out to someone she thinks could be, an ally in this war against Kevin, only to find out that Patty's kind of just accepted her crap role and doesn't really aspire to be anything better, which is sad in and of itself. So it's almost like this, like almost loop of negativity where Allison, for all her faults, did try to dream of better, did try to improve things, only for Patty to be someone who's even more cynical, is like, oh, there's no point in even wanting that. There's no point in even dreaming of anything better because you're never going to achieve it. I've accepted these things. Now, the reveal at the end, the cliffhanger at the end, that Patty is actually potentially the person who can get her oxy, that she might be able to OD her husband with, is a bit of a twist. It's a surprise, and you kind of forget by that point that she mentioned she works in a salon, so when she goes in, and your mind kind of clicks before you see her, before she turns around, you're like, oh, wait a minute. I think we're about to have a reveal here. And sure enough, there she is, and they stare at each other like two titans about to clash, and then that's when it cuts to the credits. It's an interesting moment. It definitely is interesting because Patty, and I think I said this last time, she's the one character from the sitcom part of the story that we also see outside of the sitcom, right? Because we don't see Kevin or Neil or the dad, right? Who I've barely even mentioned the dad as a character, but he's there sometimes. We never see them outside the sitcom. But Patty does get seen outside the sitcom. She is also in the real world. And I think there is probably a lot of stuff to develop there between those two. And I think obviously this episode is building to that and teasing it and sort of like putting them on this path of collision of sorts. And I'm excited to see what they're going to do with this, and if Allison is honest about what she wants the pills for, or if she lies about it, or whatever. But it is interesting if she has some kind of secret life that she's kept to herself, where it's not to, like, I'm not comparing the shows in terms of how the shows are, but just to say that she, at some point, Patty broke bad and has this other fulfilling part of her life that she's able to accept all the other parts that seem kind of dull and crappy, and she's really cynical about it because she actually has this other outlet where she's doing other stuff that's illegal. That's kind of interesting in a sense. Like, when did that happen? Maybe she's always been this way, but or maybe it's something that there was a shift at some point. I don't know. But anyway, we should probably talk a little bit about just the sequence of events with Allison, where she tries to search in the library for the perfect murder and gets blocked by the safety features on the web browser in the library, saying that this is a harmful website. And she tries a few, they all say the same thing. But weirdly, there's a guy at a computer just down the row, and it sounds like there's some adult material coming from his computer. So she tries to like whisper over him, "Hey, how did you get past the blocks and the firewalls and whatnot?" Only to discover that he's dead. He's died, and we get like a kind of a quirky, darkly comic scene with the paramedic who's there to pick up the body, and turns out he OD'd on Oxy, and Allison's surprised by this, but the guy's like, "No, this is really normal. Like, literally any type of person can do this now. Like, it's not a class thing. It's not a." And she's like, "Oh, so like a cable man," and her husband's a cable man. Like he can. Anyone can just OD on Oxy. So she actually tries to get it a couple of ways throughout the episode. She tries to go to the doctor saying she has back pain first. And says she heard, "Oh, my uncle has pain, and he said he had pills." And I did love that the tone in the room immediately changed, where the doctor just goes quiet, moves the laptop away, and gives her a serious talk about how pills can be abused. And because it feels fishy how she's kind of like trying to railroad them into getting pills to her. But the nurse speaks to her outside and recommends therapy and gives a number to call or a place to go. And it's actually where she ends up seeing Patty at the end of the episode. So, because there's a little conversation right before she goes in at the end where it's like, "Oh no, therapy was a code for here's like a black marketplace to get your pills." The nurse is like giving her a lead, and Allison just wasn't getting the hint. Admittedly, I don't think the nurse really gave much of a hint as that she was trying to suggest it was something like this. But hey, so that's the thing that goes on. But she also goes to the mechanic guy. She makes some cookies, although they're oatmeal and raisin, which if you try to butter someone up, oatmeal and raisin cookies, unless you know the person loves oatmeal and raisin cookies, that is not the type of cookie you make for someone to try and butter them up. Just FYI. But she tries to apologize for slapping him, but then says she wants Oxy. He says, "Well, I can hook you up with a guy that has that sort of stuff. I don't." It ends up in a big setup, though, and it's all about her sneaking out at night to go to this meet-up point. And you can kind of see it coming quite quickly what it is, what the misunderstanding is. It's clear that this guy who drives up to her thinks she's a prostitute, and he's been told to come here and that she's a prostitute. The mechanic has set her up for this humiliation. Now, maybe he knows this guy's not dangerous, so it's not inherently bad, but, the thought did cross my mind, like, what if this guy he sent to meet her isn't going to like the misunderstanding and things get bad? In fact, she clearly thinks that as well, because she elbows him in the face when he's actually just trying to show her how the child lock works so he can let her out. It's, the whole thing's just kind of, it's like, I don't know how dark this show might get at some point, but this is the type of thing for this little 5-minute window where it felt like it could get very dark. if it was going to, and it didn't, but it could have done, right? She is putting herself in a bit of a weird position here, where it's the middle of the night, she's meeting a stranger, she's on her own. Like there's a lot of potential pitfalls here. I did like though that before she snuck out, when she went back home, that's when she found out that Kevin had installed cameras because of what the neighbors are up to, and all of a sudden she has to sneak out by going not out the door because she'll be caught on camera. And I like that, like the sitcom part threw a wrench into her plans in the main sort of part of the episode. I like how it affected it. I thought it was a nice touch. And I'd be curious to see how we maybe do that in the future with other like sitcom plots, throwing problems into the rest of her life. Now, obviously, I guess the whole premise in a sense is that, you know, her sitcom life is a problem in the rest of her solo life. But what I mean here is that mechanically something happens that makes something in the real life part more difficult to do. But notably though, she does kind of bond with the dog that Kevin ends up getting. Kevin doesn't even try to get a dog. He just goes to a guy for weapons or something because he's an ex-SWAT guy and he gives him a dog. Again, sitcom logic. But she actually bonds with the dog. When she's leaving out the house, she sort of hugs the dog a little bit. She talks to him, and maybe it's because this is someone she can talk to who won't talk back or point out her flaws, because that's something she clearly has a problem with. That actually adds to the moment later on where she's left in the living room with nothing else there, is that Kevin also got rid of the dog. He just dumped the dog back at the guy's house without even telling the guy he was bringing the dog. He just tied the dog to the porch, and she's left there standing holding the leash. Again, this idea, the one thing that Kevin accidentally did that might have given her something to feel happy about, something to confide in, it's just gone. It's just immediately gone. So that just added to the sadness of all that stuff and the kind of the bitterness, and how no matter what she did throughout the episode, Kevin just kind of rendered it all useless by the end. It was, you know, it was a very interesting kind of thing. So yeah, yeah, there's a scene. There's another scene that I want to bring up actually. It's when she's at work and she's talking to the co-workers after she's went to the doctors, and she's bringing up her pain a little bit. The co-worker starts saying, "Hey, are you giving up?" And she's like, "What do you mean giving up?" And it's because she's wearing this dirty hoodie at this point. It's got stains on it, and she's like, I mean, you know, you've got like a decent figure under there. It'd be a shame to let it all go. It's not fair to Kevin," which I actually really like that line. And then Alison's reaction of, "Oh, it's not fair to Kev." Like, I did like that. It was like, oh, that is about him, is it? Me letting myself put on a few pounds, if that's what's going to happen. But yeah, she basically just kind of, I guess a really demoralizing scene. I guess this is maybe the other example actually in the real world of someone just saying stuff to her that's completely like off base. Well, not off base necessarily, but mean, right? I feel like other characters, when they say stuff to her, you know, when Sam tries to be honest with her, right, it's coming from a healthy place. Patty isn't trying to be good to her, but she is being brutally honest about how she sees things. This felt like, no, this woman is putting her down, and maybe that's one of the other things we're examining here, is like, it's okay, we've got the big sitcom gimmick to sort of explain how she interacts with her husband and most of the men in her life, but in the real world, we're seeing how she interacts with all the other women in her life, and the varieties of ways that kind of plays out here. Because they're not all, I mean, in fact, none of them are happy relationships, right? We've talked about her and Patty having this weird tension. They're not really friends. Her and her co-worker are not friends. Her co-worker's a complete dick to her. Is there anyone else? I mean, I guess the minor characters like the librarian or the nurse or whoever in this episode, but yeah, or even the woman last episode who worked in the makeup store, right? Like that was again another very big example of just this cold encounter with another woman. So I think that's another interesting trend we're seeing in the real world, is how she interacts with other women. You know, because obviously, I think we're obviously thinking up front about how she interacts with Kevin in and out of her sitcom life. But this is an interesting thing to also pay attention to, is how all the women interact with each other, but specifically with Alison and the others. Yeah, and in fact, the only good conversation she really has with a woman in this episode is in her dream sequence when this waitress is just smiling and happily hearing how she wants to kill her or how she's killed her husband because she wants someone to just agree with everything she wants to do. She doesn't want any resistance of any kind. So I think my big takeaway from this episode is just how it's like, oh no, she has flaws, and we're now going to explore that side of her as a character and just generally add a lot of depth that's aside from what her relationship with Kevin is, right? Because her relationship with Kevin is arguably kind of a gimmick, right? It's a plot device. But the relationship she has with all these other characters that are outside the sitcom world are almost the ones that have a lot more nuance to them, because it isn't as simple as him bad, her good. It's more complex than that. So I think all these other characters that she interacts with in the outside world that, to varying degrees either expose her flaws or her insecurities and the things that are but then she gets to just sort of, it's almost like the sitcom life is obviously a good mechanic for showing the expectations of her as the loving wife who will never question her dumb husband. But at the same time, from her perspective, the sitcom life is also a very easy way for her to just kind of package everything that she wants to blame for what all of her problems are and sort of separate it from who she actually is, which also isn't kind of fair to herself because she is unhappy and she's just putting all this blame in this sort of box that she's kind of, I don't know if she's created necessarily, but it's there. So it's interesting. There's a lot more nuance to things, I think, with episode 2, which I like. The character analysis is getting a little bit more in depth, and I'm curious to see how some of this plays out a bit further. But that is my thoughts on episode 2 of Kevin Can F Himself. So by all means, let me know what you thought of this episode in the comments if you've seen it. Like, subscribe, all that stuff helps out a bunch if you do. And of course, you can support everything over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and help keep all the shows coming, both here and over at MailFuzz Movies, where all the movie podcasts live. So go check out that too. But thanks to everyone who already does support us. That is me. I'll see you guys next time. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?